to 25 Wild Christmas Review Days. This is actually happening. We're actually doing this. So welcome to day one of my new Christmas project I'm doing. If you didn't stay to the end of my last Wild review video, that's perfectly understandable because that was a 40-minute video. But if you're new and you didn't see that video or you haven't seen anything of mine before, let me give you the breakdown of what's going to be going on. Every day on this channel, from today, December 1st, all the way to December 25th, Christmas Day, I'm going to be uploading a video every day, daily, up until Christmas, discussing a different Christmas movie. That's why I call it 25 Wild Christmas Review Days. It's the Wild Review talking about 25 different Christmas films on 25 different days. Should be fun. So that's the whole gist of what's going to be going on. Up until Christmas Day, I'm going to be discussing a different movie that I have both seen in the past, but also haven't seen at all. Like, there are going to be a few movies, especially the one we're going to talk about today, that I haven't seen before in my life. And this project is not only going to give me the chance to talk about certain Christmas films that I like talking about that I haven't spoken about in the past, but also give me an opportunity to force myself and watch these Christmas films that I have never seen before. Maybe I've heard of them in the past, but I've just never gotten a chance to watch them, or maybe I just haven't been interested in watching it. But now I'm giving myself a reason why I should check this film out, because I do believe some of these films I should see before I die. I think it'd be important. With all that said, I did give myself 3 rules that I have to follow by while doing this project, because if I didn't have these rules, I probably wouldn't have been very organized when planning this. The first rule is I'm only touching upon popular and well-known Christmas films. Now, I know there are 1,000 different Christmas films out there. I mean, Jesus, Lifetime and Hallmark, they have like a variety of different love story Christmas films that I have never heard before. Well, I'm not touching upon any of those films at all. I'm instead going to only touch upon the well-known Christmas films that will instantly pop into your head when you think of Christmas. If I were to touch upon every single one, we would be here until Halloween. 2 years from now, probably. Jumping ahead to Rule 3, because that kind of has a small little connection to Rule 1, I'm only talking about 100% Christmas-themed films, meaning that the film has to be entirely about Christmas. There are a lot of films out there that are hybrids to Christmas, one of them being one of my favorite films of all time, The Nightmare Before Christmas. I understand some people consider that a Christmas film. I would understand why people consider it a Christmas film, but I consider it a Halloween film. It's got more Halloween stuff than it does Christmas. It's Halloween trying to take over Christmas. But also, I've already spoken about Nightmare Before Christmas multiple times, and I don't think we need another video on me talking about why I love it. So that, along with any other film that has a small Christmas aspect to it, or is considered half a Christmas film, I'm not going to touch upon those at all. I'm only strictly talking about 100% Christmas-themed films. And now, jumping back over to Rule 2, mostly because Rule 2 is a great transition to what we'll be talking about today, specifically because the film we're going to talk about falls under Rule 2. I've come to understand that some specials or movies have been so popular that they've spawned sequels or even remakes. So the rule is, if I come across a film that falls under that, what's going to happen is, if the movie has any sort of sequels, then I'll be touching upon those sequels in different videos. If the movie, however, we're talking about has multiple remakes to it, then I'm only going to discuss that movie and its remakes all in one video. Sequels are kind of like episodes to a show. You have main characters that are the same within every single movie. Maybe they change here and there and you introduce new characters, but you put them into different situations. Rather than movies that are being remade or even rebooted, which are generally always telling the same exact story, but just with a few things changed. Usually the characters are always the same, but maybe you introduce a new character here or there, but generally it is the same story that you're telling, you just add a few different things. So that's the whole idea when I come across one of those type of films. Which, interestingly enough, we're going to touch upon one of those today. Oh boy! For day one of 25 Wild Christmas Review Days, we're going to start things off with talking about a classic. This is A Christmas Carol. A story written by Charles Dickens all the way back in 1843, A Christmas Carol focuses on a businessman named Ebenezer Scrooge 7 years after the death of his business partner Jacob Marley. Anytime somebody, whether they're collecting for charity or it's his unpaid clerk Bob Cratchit, asks to get money from him, he always gives them the same answer by turning them away and giving them some excuse to why he shouldn't give them money. On one cold Christmas Eve night, after closing up his business and sending Bob Cratchit home for the holiday, he walks into his home all alone, only to then get the life scared out of him when he is suddenly visited by a ghost version of his old business partner Marley. Marley, while all up in chains, informs Scrooge that he will be visited by 3 spirits that will make him change his ways so this way he doesn't end up in the same position that he's in. Thus, later that night, on the stroke of every hour, Scrooge is visited by a ghost of Christmas past, present, and future that show him, well, exactly that. One of them takes him into his Christmas past, the other one shows him what Christmas is going to be like on Christmas Day this year, and the Christmas future ghost shows him what's going to happen if he doesn't change his ways. This all gives Scrooge a wake-up call to realize maybe things should change between him and the way he interacts with people, or else the future that he was shown might actually just come true. And he even gets to see what Bob Cratchit's life is like when he's not around. I think we can all agree that, hands down, A Christmas Carol is the most classical holiday story that has ever been written in the history of anything. And I say that not only because the story is just such a classic and is really well known to tell around this time of year, but this story has been adapted in so many different ways, from being performed on stage in the theater to being put on the big screen, or having television specials made off of it, or even having episodes and shows reference the whole idea of A Christmas Carol, or even do their own Christmas Carol. Ironically enough, SpongeBob hasn't done one yet, which doesn't make sense because it has the perfect setup for it. But no, let's just make a new one by putting SpongeBob on the moon with Santa. This has been adapted in so many different ways that it literally has me breaking my own rule on how I'm going to watch every single remake that this story tells, because there are just so many different adaptations of it that we would be here for like 10 hours. Also, fun fact, I have the book of A Christmas Carol. I read it in 7th grade and I thought it was pretty cool, but watching the films of A Christmas Carol, that's what's given me like a better appreciation about this story, because it is genuinely a really great story. I guess I'm just one of those guys that would rather prefer watch it on television and get sucked into the story by watching it rather than reading it. So what am I going to talk about? Well, like I said, there are just so many different adaptations of this story that it was kind of impossible for me to watch every single one of them and make sure that this video came out on December 1st. Of course, I had to choose this one to be the first one, only because I thought it'd be clever to start out with a Christmas classic and probably the oldest Christmas story. That's great. So, rather than talk about every single one of the different adaptations of it, I've narrowed it down to only 4 different adaptations of this story that I think are the most popular ones, especially for young viewers. So I saw The Christmas Carol that came out in 1938, which I think is the first movie adaptation of this story. I could be wrong, but that is the earliest one that I could find. And then the other 3, coincidentally, are all Disney versions. The following ones I saw were Mickey's Christmas Carol, The Muppets Christmas Carol, and Disney's A Christmas Carol with Jim Carrey. So this is how it's going to go down. I'm just going to quickly talk about each different movie, and then at the end I'll compare all of them and tell you which one out of the 4 I enjoyed the most. While watching all of these, I did keep in mind to pay attention to certain things, specifically how Scrooge was displayed on screen by the certain person that was playing him, the ghost interaction with him, but also the flow of the story, if it actually held up to the original tale that it was telling. So we're starting off with the oldest one, the 1938 Christmas Carol. In the role of Ebenezer Scrooge, we had a man named Reginald Owens. I had a bit of an appreciation when I saw this film, mostly because I think out of all the ones that I've seen, this one is very pure to the way that everyone interacted with each other. Because when you look back in the early 1900s, if you do research and look back to how people acted, they acted very similar to how the book was actually written. And you can argue like, oh, that was that was just genuine good acting that they were doing. Yes, that's occasionally the thing. These are really good actors and they portray these characters very well, but just the way that their body movements were and the way that they expressed their lines to each other, like, you generally are sucked into this film thinking that this is actually made in the time period that it's supposed to be taking place in. The one thing I really liked was the ghost of Marley, how I was just really impressed that they made Marley look like a ghost, like he's all faded, and his voice is like yelling like he's in some sort of pain. I really liked the effect that they did, especially since this was, again, from the 30s. I didn't think they would be able to pull that type of thing off, and I'm very curious to know how they managed to do that in their time period, because obviously editing software was very different back then, especially since film around that time was relatively new. I thought this one held up to the story very well. Reginald, who played Scrooge, I enjoyed his performance. Not my favorite, but he definitely fit the role of a grumpy old man very well. Although Marley was looking very ghost-like, the other three ghosts, they didn't look very ghost-like. They just looked like that, you know, they were there, which is supposed to be the thing. It would have been cool if they had that ghost effect on them as well. The one thing that I noticed that this film does not have is it doesn't do the whole scene where we look back at Ebenezer's past and we see him like fall in love with this girl and we see him working at his old job. That's kind of all we see. We don't see the party happen. We don't see him fall in love. That's the only thing that's kind of missing from this one that all the other ones had. But overall, I enjoyed it. Again, I'm not sure if this is the original Christmas Carol film. This is just the earliest one that I could find. But if it is, then yeah, it was pretty cool. It wasn't that long like I expected it to be, but you know, it was short, it got to the point, it didn't waste any time, so yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. So Mickey's Christmas Carol is not much of a movie. I would consider it more of a television special, I guess. It's only like 30 minutes, and when you think about it, it shouldn't even be called Mickey's Christmas Carol. It should be called Disney's Christmas Carol, because it's got more Disney in it than it does Mickey. Like, Mickey plays the role of Bob Cratchit, which I guess is the first thing I should touch upon. When I watched this one, I felt like I wasn't really watching much of a Christmas Carol story. I felt like I was watching a Christmas Carol be performed by Disney characters. Like, I felt like I was watching a play of Disney characters putting on the show of A Christmas Carol, which I guess is what you're supposed to feel like when you watch this. It's definitely an interesting adaptation of A Christmas Carol. I wouldn't say it takes the story in a different direction at all, because this one, like all the other ones, they do the exact same thing by telling the Christmas Carol story. It's kind of hard to mess up on A Christmas Carol when you're doing A Christmas Carol. I mean, you could joke around with it and, you know, make things go wrong, but where was I going with that? But yeah, Mickey's Christmas Carol. This one, I'm not sure on this one, only because it's kind of forgettable for me. I mean, I thought it was okay. What's interesting is the first one from 38, that one didn't focus on Scrooge and his love life in the past. What's interesting is the same thing kind of happens in this one, except we focus on Scrooge's love life, but we don't focus on him at school, or we see his job, but there's like one aspect of the story missing in Mickey's Christmas Carol and one aspect missing in the 38 Christmas Carol. Of course, Scrooge is played by Scrooge McDuck, which guess that's kind of a no-brainer. Donald Duck is playing his nephew Fred. We have Mickey as Bob Cratchit. It would make sense for Mickey to be Bob Cratchit because then we can have Minnie as his wife. Goofy is Marley, which I found to be pretty funny, especially since Goofy was very clumsy, to where Marley isn't that much of a clumsy person. He's just more of just a scary ghost. I mean, it was a nice little adaptation. It was a nice little story. Telling another story, so I mean, I enjoyed it. I didn't grow up with it. I know a lot of people grew up with Mickey's Christmas Carol, which is one of the reasons why I chose it, because this is one of the more well-known Christmas carols, but it's alright. One last comment that I have about it, I did enjoy seeing Jiminy Cricket in it, which was very interesting. He played the role of Ghost of Christmas Past, which was really interesting. I wish they kind of kept the idea that, you know, Disney characters from past, present, and future would play the ghost. Like, it would have been really interesting to see that, especially Ghost of Christmas Future, because you could have a character that has not been shown yet, but eventually will be shown in the Disney universe, if you want to consider that to be one big universe. But they kind of missed out on that, so shame on you, but hey, good attempt. Jumping all the way to 1992, we have The Muppets Christmas Carol, which is one that I've seen trailers for, I've seen clips for, but I've never exactly sat down to watch the movie of. My hair is sticking up, that's interesting. This one is very similar to Mickey's Christmas Carol when it comes to the role of Bob Cratchit, because in Mickey's Christmas Carol we had Mickey playing the role of Bob. In this one we have Kermit playing the role of Bob, which would make sense because Kermit and Miss Piggy, they obviously have a relationship going on. So it's very interesting that in both these different adaptations, the main iconic character that we associate with both Disney and the Muppets, they seem to not be playing the main part of Scrooge, but rather the second main character of the story, who plays not a small part in A Christmas Carol, but a small enough part to where we don't really see them as much as we should. In the role this time of Scrooge, we don't have a Muppet, but instead Michael Caine, which is very interesting. I've heard some people say that Michael Caine wasn't a very good Scrooge in this film because he wasn't as mean as Scrooge is supposed to be. He actually had more of a light heart at some times, specifically because it's the Muppets and you're dealing with a children's audience. But I would disagree on that argument. I actually enjoyed Michael Caine's performance, and I thought he was very mean. There's a scene where he's screaming at Kermit playing Bob Cratchit. There are scenes where he can come off as a very grouchy person, and I like the fact that over the course of the film, we see him enjoying things. We see smiles on his face because he's starting to like this idea. Another thing pretty interesting is that this one was creepy, but it wasn't as creepy as it's supposed to. A Christmas Carol is supposed to kind of tell this kind of dark tale, but it wasn't as dark or scary as it was supposed to, because again, you're dealing with a children's audience, unlike Mickey's Christmas Carol, where at one point we throw Scrooge McDuck into a pit of fire, so that's interesting. Also different in this one, there are two different Marleys. The two old grumpy guys that you always see in the Muppets, Slater and Walter, they actually take a part in this film and play both two different Marleys. And they even have a musical number, which is interesting because of all the times that I've seen the Muppets, I don't recall them ever singing, nor do I ever recall them having a major part in the story. We see them multiple times, both as ghosts, but also when we go to the past. Also, I gotta give a little sympathy clap because of the pun that was made with Fozzie Bear. If you've seen the film and if you know the story of A Christmas Carol, you'll understand why. Gonzo and Rizzo were the ones narrating the story, and they were the only ones that were kind of playing themselves. All the other Muppets, it was really weird to see them playing characters rather than themselves. And I only say that because I saw coming attractions to this, and it was like, you know, Kermit the Frog is playing Bob Cratchit, and it was like weird because somebody plays Kermit the Frog, so you're basically saying that this guy plays Kermit the Frog who's playing Bob Cratchit. It was just kind of weird. But Gonzo and Rizzo were narrating the story, more of Gonzo, and I thought it brought a little comedic effect to the story, especially at one point where they get so scared that they just ditch the story entirely, and that happens around the time Christmas Future happens. Overall, I enjoyed this adaptation to it. I found myself enjoying this one, weirdly enough, more than the Mickey Mouse one. So that's a bit interesting. But yeah, I like this one. I think Michael Caine did a really good Scrooge. The one last thing I do want to say is I like the idea of the Christmas present ghost. The whole time he was on the screen, he kept like repeating things and like introducing himself multiple times. And I found that really interesting because that kind of gave you the idea that he's living in the present, so he doesn't have any recollection of the past, and he doesn't, obviously nobody knows what's going to happen in the future, but he only stays in the present, so it would make sense for him to constantly introduce himself and talk about things that are only happening in the present, so I like that. That's pretty clever. Last last but not least, the one that I've been kind of dreading to see, mostly because I just didn't know if I would enjoy it, the 2009 Disney Christmas Carol. This one not having any Disney characters in it at all, but rather Jim Carrey as the role of Scrooge. Now, the reason I said I've been dreading to see this one is not because it was scary, but rather it was just something I didn't think I was going to like. And I'm not going to say I loved it. I'll say I liked it. I definitely judged it a bit too much. But there are some things that I didn't enjoy about it. One of them being that the lighting in it is awful. And this is only in a few parts. For some reason, when the scene calls for it to be night, or if, we're in a dark room, there's like no light at all. Like there's the scene with Ebenezer Scrooge. He drops his keys when he's at his front door. You can't see anything. And of course we see like a little glow because Marley's face shows up on the little knocker thing on the door. So that adds a little suspense. But there were a lot of scenes in the beginning where it was just like really dark that it was kind of aggravating because you couldn't really see what was going on. Another point in the beginning, the part where we're waiting for Marley to show up, I felt like that scene kind of went on forever. So this film definitely took its time. I mean, we didn't get to the first ghost until, about 35 minutes into the story. But those are kind of just like minor complaints I have about it. Overall, I did kind of enjoy the film. This one, along with the one from 1938, definitely stuck with the original roots of A Christmas Carol. This told the story properly, and I felt like this one did exactly that. Like, it stuck to all of its roots. It probably incorporated a few new things to it, specifically the ending, because this one, different from all the other ones, we don't see Scrooge going to Bob Cratchit's home and having dinner with him and his family and him interacting with Tiny Tim. We don't get that at all. At the ending, we get him on Christmas Day. He gets the turkey, gives it to the boy, goes to his nephew's home. But then we just jump to the next day at work and we see him interact with Bob, and that's kind of it. We see Tiny Tim on Scrooge's shoulder in like a flashback type little clip, but that's kind of the only thing that was missing. We get the classic "God bless us" line at the end, but it's not in the right spot that it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be said in the home, not on the streets, on Scrooge's shoulder. But other than that, although I didn't love this one, I definitely enjoyed it. I thought the animation for it was pretty cool. This was very similar animation to the Polar Express, and I found that animation to be very interesting. I'm very curious to know how they managed to do that stuff. I don't know if it's fully animated or if it's, actual people like in suits doing the motions and that's how they animate it. I'm not sure. I'm unintelligent when it comes to that stuff, but I think that animation's pretty cool. Jim Carrey plays a pretty cool Scrooge. At first I had a hard time believing that was him, but as we go on with the story, especially when we see him interact with Marley, I full out knew that was Jim Carrey, and it even kind of looked like him too. They did a really good job like animating his face and stuff to make Scrooge look like Jim Carrey, both as an elderly man but also as an adult and teenager in the past section of the film. So I thought that was pretty cool. Like I jokingly said in the beginning, there were some like scary points in this film. Like there was a jump scare in the beginning, and the reason for that is because this was the first Christmas Carol film, and I think the first Disney film that was shown in an IMAX 3D theater. So this film is one of the first 3D films that ever was released in theaters. And you could tell because there are things going up on the screen. There's things like this close, and things zoom in and stuff. So yeah, it's pretty obvious that this was a made for 3D film when you watch it, not in 3D. I also enjoyed the adventure that we kind of go on. That's what I'm going to call it. The adventure we go on when we see Scrooge and the ghost of Christmas Past like flying. Like we're with them when they fly out the window into the past. And I thought that was pretty cool because it kind of felt like a little ride. Yay! With all that said, I enjoyed that adaptation of the Christmas Carol. I didn't love it like a lot of people did. A lot of people like, this is their Christmas Carol. Personally, it's not for me. Out of these 4 Christmas carols that I did see, though, the Christmas Carol that I would say is probably my favorite is the Muppets Christmas Carol. And it's not because I'm a sucker for things with Muppets, because I like the Muppets, but I just really enjoyed Michael Caine's performance as Scrooge. Jim Carrey comes in a close second, because he had that role spot on as well. Reginald Owen would come in third place only because he's partially the original Scrooge when it comes to movies. And then Scrooge McDuck would come in fourth place. Again, the Mickey Mouse one was alright, but not my favorite. So with all that said, Christmas Carol, pretty good story, definitely a classic. I enjoyed the Muppet one, and while I won't say it's a story that I'm going to make it a point to watch every year like I do with the Grinch and Elf, if I ever came across A Christmas Carol again, I wouldn't mind sitting down and checking it out just for a bit. I would watch it in full if somebody asked me if I wanted to. But yeah, so Christmas Carol, pretty good. Pretty good. I enjoyed it. And with that said, that is day 1 down, only 24 more to go for 25 Wild Christmas Review Days. It's going to be a very long December. It's going to be a long journey. It's going to be an interesting month, but we're going to get through it. This is going to be something interesting for me to do, and if by the end I don't like it, I'm never doing it again. Chances of me ever doing it again, though, are... I'm probably never going to do this again. So with that all said, now I want to pass the question over to you. What do you think of A Christmas Carol? Which one is your favorite adaptation of A Christmas Carol? Do you agree or disagree with anything that I have said about A Christmas Carol? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. That's it for day 1 of 25 Wild Christmas Review Days. Make sure you come back tomorrow and the following days. We got a lot of more goodies coming around, especially tomorrow, because I'll be talking about another Christmas tale that, unlike A Christmas Carol, which is considered a classic and brilliantly written, this one is stupid. Thanks for watching The Wild Review. I'm The Wild Reviewer, and you just saw me review a thing.